On a cold night over West Texas, a line of pale lights moved silently above the cotton fields, too steady to feel random and too strange to forget. What were people in Lubbock really seeing? The mystery belongs to Lubbock, Texas, a flat college town on the Llano Estacado where the sky feels enormous and every light can seem to travel forever. In 1951, that openness made the impossible easier to notice. This was an era when jet age excitement and Cold War unease shared the same sky. People were already looking upward, wondering whether new machines, secret tests, or something else had arrived. The first reports came from ordinary witnesses, not thrill-seekers. They described a formation of lights crossing overhead with a smooth, purposeful motion that seemed to ignore the usual behavior of airplanes. Soon the story spread beyond one backyard and one pair of eyes. In a town where neighbors knew each other well, the lights became a shared event, discussed with the intensity of something seen but not understood. What made the case endure was not just that people saw lights, but how they described them. The objects appeared in groups, often bright and round, moving with a disciplined spacing that felt deliberate. Some witnesses said the lights were silent, and that silence mattered. In a sky full of engines, wind and distance, a moving cluster with no obvious sound felt like a detail that should not have been possible. Then came the photographs, taken by a Texas tech student who pointed a camera into the darkness and captured a pattern that still invites argument. For believers, those images gave the lights a physical footprint. The pictures showed a cluster of luminous shapes, not a single isolated point. Even now, the arrangement is part of the fascination because it suggests movement by design rather than chance. That detail kept the case alive, the formation itself. Witnesses did not describe a wandering star or a lone flare, but a coordinated group that seemed to travel together as if linked. Another point that still draws attention is the timing. The sightings came in a narrow window, then repeated, as though something had entered the region, passed over town, and moved on. Local newspapers and investigators quickly turned the episode into a public puzzle. Once the reports were compared, the question shifted from whether people saw something to what kind of thing could match so many descriptions. The strongest believer case rests on consistency. Different witnesses, from different places, kept returning to the same core image: lights in formation, moving smoothly across the Lubbock sky. That consistency is hard to dismiss because the witnesses were not all looking for a mystery. Some were outside by chance, and some only noticed the lights after someone else pointed upward. The photographs added another layer of tension. They did not settle the case, but they gave later investigators something concrete to measure, compare, and question for decades. Supporters of the extraordinary interpretation often focus on movement that seems too organized for random sky clutter. If the lights were not aircraft and not stars, what kind of presence leaves that kind of impression? The case also sits in a larger American pattern from the early 1950s, when many people reported unusual aerial phenomena. Lubbock became one of the clearest and most photographed examples of that era. Yet the same era produced a flood of misidentifications, and that matters too. Bright planets, aircraft, and reflections can all behave strangely when seen from the ground at night. Some researchers pointed to birds reflecting city light or moonlight, especially when seen in formation. It is a grounded idea, and it helps explain why the shapes could seem clustered and mobile. But that explanation leaves its own discomfort. Witnesses were not describing a few drifting specks. They remembered bright objects with an unusual steadiness, and that steadiness is what keeps the case open. The photographs remain especially difficult to place neatly. Depending on how they are interpreted, they can suggest airborne objects, a visual trick, or something that photography captured imperfectly but not meaninglessly. That ambiguity is part of the enduring power of the Lubbock Lights. The evidence is real enough to study, yet elusive enough to keep changing shape as each generation looks back. Even the setting seems to amplify the mystery. On the Llano Estacado, the horizon is so low and the sky so wide that a small cluster of lights can dominate everything beneath it. That is why the case never fully settled into a simple local legend. It became a record of perception under open sky, where multiple people saw enough to agree but not enough to explain. For some, the most compelling possibility is that Lubbock briefly hosted something not built for human aviation. The lights seem to move with intent, and intent is what makes a mystery feel alive. For others, the case is a reminder that the eye can assemble order from distance, darkness, and expectation. The same sky that inspires wonder can also turn familiar things into something else. Still, the reports were not written by people chasing a story. They were made by residents who looked up, noticed something unusual, and tried to describe it as carefully as they could. That human element matters because the Lubbock Lights were experienced, not merely discussed. A shared sighting has a different weight than rumor, especially when it leaves behind photographs and memory. And yet memory can sharpen some details while blurring others. The exact shape, height, and distance of the lights remain debated, which is why the case still resists a final, clean conclusion. That uncertainty is what keeps the story from fading. The lights were seen, photographed, and argued over, but the meaning of what crossed that sky remains stubbornly unfinished. In the end, the Lubbock Lights stand between explanation and enigma. Birds, aircraft, and visual misreadings may account for part of it, but they do not quite erase the feeling that something unusual passed overhead. Maybe that is why the case still matters. It captures the moment when a normal town looked up into a vast Texas sky and found for a few minutes that the familiar world had become mysterious.